welcome back to this lecture. In this lecture, we are going to talk about how React works. I'm going to explain in detail of how React expresses the user UI. To do this, you need to understand what a React element is and what a virtual DOM is. Also, we will look at what JXX is and how to use it. In our first lecture, we briefly talked about the difference between MPA and SPA. I explained the difference between a multi-page application and a single-page application. If you talk about the details, you can first understand that MPA is to create and show most of the UI that users meet on the server. If you look at the picture of the textbook on the left, the part that says that it is an existing web application is an explanation of MPA. The client sends a specific request to the server. It is called a request. When a request is sent through a URL, the server dynamically creates the page requested by the user using a servlet or JSP if the server sees it based on Java. A page is dynamically created and information about the page is sent as a response. When a specific page is created on the server, the header information contains the information that the specific page is a type of page and puts it together in the header information clients send. When browser understands the page that the server wants to send is an HTML page or an image through the response object from the server, and displays the contents on the screen. When a user clicks a link on a specific page or clicks a button to send another request, the server creates the page and sends the result. Then, from the client's point of view, all the pages that need to be displayed to the user exist on the server. If there is another request, it will be same send it to receive the page and display it. So from the client's point of view, most of the pages that need to be displayed to the user exist on the server. So this is called a multi-page application. From the client's point of view, there are pages on the server. In the form of multiple pages, this was the way to compose user UI in the existing web application. But when React appeared, there is a new application called single page application. Of course, React is not the only application to implement a single page application. There is Vue and AngularJS, and there are various JavaScript based UI techniques are all based on single page applications. In the form of a single page application composed of React, Vue, or AngularJS, the client sends a specific request through the same URL, but the response page is sent only for this first request. You think of this response page as HTML in a blank space. In response, the page is sent from the server, but there is no content on this page. And the client sends a request for the data that needs to be displayed to the server, and the server shows only the information about the data in the form of JSON. Then, what the client will have is an empty space that needs to be shown to the user. You have two kinds of data information about the page and what data should be contained in it. Then, who creates and shows how to display this data on the screen is what the client's React library does. This data is displayed on the screen using the React library made of JavaScript, and the unit of data displayed on the screen is shown in component units. So, from the client's point of view, there is only one page sent from the server in the blank space received at the beginning. From then, only JSON type data is received and displayed on the screen by the client. This is a single page application. Creating and displaying a user screen on the client is called client-side rendering, which is shortcut we call it CSR. Of course, there are drawbacks in this part of CSR. But now, that part can be solved later by using a mixture of server-side rendering and client-side rendering. Our standard is to focus on this technique of composing the screen as a single page application. The reason I explained this in detail is that the method of creating the existing web application and the method of creating a screen using React are different. So, if you create a page in the way you previously thought, it is somewhat difficult to understand React. Because of the difficulty, I have to explain this in more detail. The next thing look at is the React element. The React element is simply the smallest unique in the user UI composed of React. This React element is simply data. It is usually called a plain object, which is only getter, but you can understand that it has the form of a JavaScript general object. But you do not actually create and use React elements directly. However, you should hear what React elements are, why we use JXX, and roughly how React's virtual DOM works so that you can understand the part. Then let's take a closer look at what React element is. Let's look at the code and explain in a bit. As you can see in the React library, the React element is created through a function called createElement that the React library has. Ultimately, the React element is data that looks like this. When we take the React element created with createElement on the console, it is expressed as having this information. This createElement function takes three parameters. The part indicated by H1 in front is the type. The second one is props, and the third one is child. You can think of it as children, but what is type? When we show some element on the screen, is this HTML H1 or React specific element that we created or component? Or I will explain it later, is it React fragment? There are three types. Basically, I want to use a specific type of basic HTML that is a tag called H1. I didn't specify a separate attribute. There are no children, and I want to simply print the string to the H1 tag. What I ultimately want is to print the text Hello React in the form of the H1 tag using React. So we need React elements, but using a function called createElement. There is no separate property of the H1 tag, and I created one such element with a child called Hello React and put it in a specific variable. And while calling a function called render to React DOM, we send the H1 element and write it in a specific document, and I use this render method to print it on the screen. When this happens, the contents are displayed on the screen. Of course, since the code itself is shown only a certain part, there are a little more code to be written back and forth. But once you create an element in this way, the form that can be sprayed on the screen with React. Now, createElement here is React. Also, the render method function is called React DOM. This subject is different. When I introduced React in the last lecture, I told you that there is React.js in the first lecture that is used, and you have to use two libraries called React-DOM.js. This React.js is the core library. I told you that React-DOM or React-Native is used depending on the type of UI device that needs to be shown to the user. React.js is used when creating elements or components, as you can see, and the task of showing the screen in that React-DOM.js play this role. Then React-DOM.render you see is in React-DOM's library. Create element is in React.js. Now, if we create an element in this form, React DOM will render it on the screen with this element. Then we will do the work of creating the element in the future. Now, there is something that needs to be explained very importantly. As you can see, I have a very simple element that takes the h1 tag hello react. By the way, let's assume that it is a div tag that contains a specific list on one screen. In that case, each of these elements becomes an element of React. Then, if it's a div tag in this large form, it means that tags such as a list or ul, li, in an element having a div type must be nested while calling the createElement function. In other words, where hello React is written, you have to create React.createElement again, and a specific code is put it in again. Of course, it will be difficult to write the code and see the code. So JXX came out to solve this part. I will explain how to use JXX and the features of its syntax in the next time. For right now, just understand that the smallest unit that composes is the React element. If you use a method called createElement, you can create an element by using a function. You can create an element like this. However, since we will make the JXX syntax and React elements in Unix of components to be created, you will not actually create and use React elements in this way. But you must be aware that the smallest unit that composes the screen is the React element. I will explain in a moment what the concept of this virtual DOM using React elements is. Now I will briefly explain what a virtual DOM is. The concept of a virtual DOM exists when React renders a screen. Actually, when we see a specific screen in this web browser, there is DOM object, and the web browser renders and shows the screen for this DOM object. React has a virtual DOM in memory, so when you change the virtual DOM, React compares the actual DOM and the virtual DOM. And if there is a change, it modifies that part and changes the actual DOM. Then the user can see that the screen has changed. We try to compose the screen using JavaScript. In the case, we generally access the JavaScript DOM directly from the previous JavaScript version. That is, event in the MPA version and change the data of the DOM. I tried to change the screen by making the actual DOM invisible or by changing the properties of the DOM. However, changing the screen with the real DOM that is actually on the screen is difficult to find the DOM. And it is true that there are performance problems in this area. So, React has the concept of a virtual DOM. You can understand this virtual DOM describes what is displayed on the screen that exists in memory. However, each of these elements that make up the virtual DOM becomes a React element. So in this value that the React element has, the shape generally only has the shape of a plain object that is data, so you can understand that it is only explaining how it should be displayed on the screen. So it is said that we create the React element. And to say that we render the screen through React-DOM.render method, we change the values for these elements in memory or add elements. And you can understand that rendering through this React DOM is to compare the changed data of the virtual DOM with the actual DOM to modify it and reflect it. How to compare and patch is the work of the React library. We have the concept of a virtual DOM, and you only need to understand the mechanism to the extent that you understand that the elements that make up the virtual DOM are React elements. Next time, let's take a brief look at the JXX syntax that allows you to create React elements without actually using create element. That is, without using React.createElement. How to actually display the screen with JXX. This is how to use JSX. I will explain about it. I will finish this lecture here, and I hope it will help you understand about the React a little bit more, and hope to see you in the next lecture. Thank you so much.